Tensions between American colonists and Britain had been increasing in the colonies, particularly since the Stamp Act of 1765. Britain was furious about the Boston Tea Party of 1773, when colonial rebels, known as the Sons of Liberty, dumped 342 chests filled with tea into Massachusetts Bay in protest of British import taxes. As punishment, the British government imposed the Coercive Acts of 1774, but these new laws only angered the Americans further. Suspicious of the colonists, British commander General Thomas Gage ordered his troops to seize weapons and gunpowder stockpiled by the colonists in the summer of 1774. Although initially surprised by this order, the colonists figured out how to use the raids to their advantage. Colonial insiders would tell the local committee of correspondence about a planned raid, and the committee would send warnings to local allies, who would prepare for the army. In 1775, the rebels learned of a plan to arrest Sons of Liberty members Samuel Adams and John Hancock. At 11 p.m. on April 18th, Paul Revere was instructed to ride to Lexington, Massachusetts, and warn Adams and Hancock that the British were coming. He delivered his message an hour later. He was then joined by William Dawes and Dr. Samuel Prescott as they rode to nearby Concord to warn of an upcoming raid. A British patrol caught them, however, and only Prescott made it to Concord to deliver the warning. News of the impending raids spread quickly. Parliament had already declared Massachusetts to be in a state of rebellion, which meant that British soldiers could shoot suspected rebels on sight. Fearing the worst, colonial volunteer soldiers began preparing for the arrival of British troops. On the morning of April 19th, 1775, 77 Minutemen came face to face with some 700 British soldiers who had entered Lexington. A tense standoff was broken by a single gunshot, and within minutes, 10 Minutemen lay dead. British forces marched on to Concord to complete their raid, but when they arrived, the supplies were gone. Meanwhile, a group of 400 angry colonists confronted redcoats elsewhere in Concord, forcing them to retreat. The battles of Lexington and Concord started the American Revolution and greatly boosted patriot morale. After the battles of Lexington and Concord ended, 16,000 colonial Minutemen came to surround Boston to prevent the 6,500 British soldiers quartered there from leaving. The siege of Boston went uncontested for 2 months until mid-June 1775. American soldiers heard rumors that British General Thomas Gage was going to move soldiers to a hill called Dorchester Heights, which would give the British a good vantage point from which to start firing on the Americans. The colonists decided to move their own troops into the hills just outside of Boston to the north and south. On June 16, 1775, they mistakenly marched past Bunker Hill and hunkered down on Breed's Hill. This, plus a mislabeled British map, is why the battle is commonly known as the Battle of Bunker Hill. The next morning, at the Battle of Bunker Hill, 2,300 British soldiers defeated a much smaller band of untrained colonists. Though they won by taking the hill, in the 2-hour battle, the British suffered 1,054 casualties to the Americans' 450. And because their forces were so depleted, they retreated to Boston rather than try to take Dorchester Heights. The siege of Boston would ultimately end when the British were forced to leave Boston in March 1776. Their strong showing in battle energized the colonists, and George Washington arrived shortly after to take command of the new Continental Army and give it the structure needed to win a war.